A warm welcome on behalf of MJuris. You would have seen our first video on Code on Wages 2020. In that video, we dealt with the definition of contractor and contract labor. In continuation of our first video, we would, in this video, deal with interstate migrant worker and the definition of appropriate government and its impact on business. We looked at the term contract labor in the earlier video. The definition of contract labor under the Code on Wages 2019 includes an interstate migrant worker. Till date, the provisions of the Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Condition of Service Act 1979 has been governing the field with regard to employment of interstate migrant workmen. However, for the first time, under the Code on Wages 2019, a contract labor includes interstate migrant workmen or vice versa. The interstate migrant workman is also a contract labor. The term interstate migrant workman, however, has not been defined under the Code on Wages 2019. The term has been defined only in the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Condition Code 2020. In the absence of a definition for interstate migrant worker under the Code on Wages 2019, the definition as found under the Occupational Safety and Health Code 2020 would need to be borrowed. We would deal in more detail with regard to the definition of interstate migrant worker when we are dealing with the Occupational Safety and Health Code 2020. For now, for the purposes of the Code on Wages 2019, what would need to be appreciated is that an interstate migrant worker is also construed as a contract labor, and hence all provisions which govern a contract labor would also govern an interstate migrant worker. The term appropriate government is what we are going to see next. This term is quite important for all businesses. An industrial establishment, to know whether it needs to follow the state government rules or the central government rules, or whether it has to comply with what the authorities of the state government say or the central government are to say, they need to look upon this definition, and this definition is hence very crucial for all industrial establishments and employers. When you look into this definition, it may appear that there is no significant change when you compare the term appropriate government as found either under the Minimum Wages or Payment of Wages Act or any other act which has been subsumed by the Code on Wages 2019. But however, inclusion of the words establishment of contractors for the purpose of such establishments, these words are going to have a significant impact on certain industries. We shall illustrate the same with an example, and the slide that you next going to see would help you to understand the same. The term appropriate government has been defined in section 2D of the Code on Wages 2019. For the railways, mines, oil fields, major ports, airport, telecommunication industry, banking industry, insurance industry, and all establishments that are run under the control of the central government, including public sector undertakings, the appropriate government would be the central government. In all other cases, the state government would be the appropriate government. To elaborate on this definition of appropriate government and its impact on businesses, we have provided an illustration which you now see on the screen. The illustration pertains to an security agency which provides services to an airport, a bank, a hospital and a factory. For the purpose of Minimum Wages Act, this security agency, as on date, would need to ensure that it is compliant with the rates of minimum wages that a state government prescribes, as the state government alone is the appropriate government for this security agency. Even if the security agency were to depute its security guards to various locations each week, as shown in the slide now that you're seeing, the rates of minimum wages would not change. The security agency would only need to follow the rates of minimum wages prescribed by the state government, as the state government is the appropriate government. Would this be the same once the Code on Wages 2019 gets notified, is what we are going to see in the next two slides. We just saw that the definition of appropriate government has undergone a change under the Code on Wages 2019, and the appropriate government for a contractor is going to be the appropriate government of the principal employer. So in that context, when we see what is the change that the Code on 2019 brings about, you would find in the slide that you are now seeing that though it is the same security agency providing the same security service, the appropriate government is going to vary based on the place of work of the employee belonging to the security agency. So if the security agency's security guards were to work in a factory or a hospital, it would still be the state government which is the appropriate government. However, when they are sent to an airport or a bank, because of the change in the definition of appropriate government, it is going to be the central government which is going to be the appropriate government. Will this have an impact on minimum wages, payment of wages, etc.? Yes, it is certainly going to have an impact, which we would be seeing in the next slide. Under the Minimum Wages Act, for instance, the place of work was immaterial. But under the Code on Wages 2019, the place of work is going to be material to determine what is the rates of minimum wages that an employee would earn or an employer would need to pay an employee. The same example of a security guard. Assuming that the security guard is asked to work in 4 different places by the security agency, as shown now, between an airport, hospital, bank and factory within the same month, then every week he would need to be paid different rates of minimum wages, because the appropriate government is going to vary depending on the place of work of the employee. This, in our view, is an anomalous situation. The place of work should not determine the rates of minimum wages of an employee. The nature of work and who the employer alone should reckon the rates of minimum wages. That has been the correct legal position in our view till now. The change brought about to the definition of appropriate government is going to impact industrial establishments which provide services to principal employers for whom the appropriate government is the central government. Like the security agency example that we just saw, if your establishment were to provide a service to a principal employer to whom the central government is the appropriate government, then when you depute your employees to do work for such an establishment, you would need to ensure compliance with the minimum wages prescribed by the central government, and similarly with all other requirements which the central government mandates as for those employees, that is the employees deputed by you to work for an establishment for whom the appropriate government is the central government, then you need to ensure compliance with the requirements laid down by the central government. This, in our view, is going to not be in the best interest of employers and is certainly not in aid of ease of doing business. We have in this video dealt with the term interstate migrant workmen as found in the definition of contract labor and the term appropriate government. we would in our next video also be dealing with other provisions of Code on Wages 2019. We thank you for subscribing to MJuris. Thank you.